Welcome everyone. Welcome to the second session of Love in the Time of Crisis, From Separation to Interbeing. I'm James B. Barbieri, Associate Program Director here at the Pari Center, and I will be your host for today. As a host, I'm here to help you throughout the call, so any problems, technical or not, feel free to just drop me a message. So to start off this session, we are again fortunate to have poet Richard Berengarten as part of our series who will introduce this session. And let's start with his poem, his reading of the poem now.
Hello, this is Richard Berengarten from Cambridge, England. I'm honoured to have been asked to give a short poetic preface to the webinar that you're just about to attend with Rabbi Neal Rose. I have to confess that in choosing this poem, I'm taking a bit of a risk because I have not yet been informed of the subject of Rabbi Rose's webinar. So I hope what follows is consonant with it. The reason I've chosen this particular poem is that it's to do with the Kabbalah, and I have read on the internet that Rabbi Rose is deeply read in the Kabbalah. The poem, as you can see, is called The Rose of Sharon. I wrote it in the mid-1970s, so that's approximately 45 or more years ago. And the quotation that I'm following here is, of course, from the Song of Solomon. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. Solomon being the most absolutely wonderful love poem, both a poem of eros, about erotic love, and about the love of God, love for God, or the love of God for humanity. My other quotation is from William Blake. The fire is falling. The only other thing I want to say about this poem is that it is Kabbalistic, and that the underlying theme is the Shekinah, the female aspect of the divinity. The Rose of Sharon. When primeval dusts were formed, and the stars sprayed on the skies, and the fallow clays were warmed, and grew temples, feathers, eyes, oh, what shrinkage of his power, through what waste and in what rages were the seeds of my love's flower scattered down deserted ages. But what spores spread down the wind, what sparks through the thunder break, how he laughs, my love, to find a word alive, a man awake. Moses on the mountain saw jewels blazing at his throat, ornaments without a flaw, and upon the tablets wrote, you who crown his loveliness, spreading perfume round his name, garment for his nakedness, diadem around his flame, generations of repose veil you from his naked eye, multifoliate, thornless rose, on your bed of ashes lie. Heraclitus copied this from the same text in the fire, crucified on every kiss, charred by night in man's desire. You who bore his burning oil and were chalice for his sword, chosen vessel for his foil, withered now and self-abhorred, out of time your wedding glory, withered now and nearly dead, who are but a children's story buried in a madman's head. Now a cock in Hades crows, and the sleepy hooded owls sicken as night's fetus grows Adam Kadmon in their bowels. Listen for the fire falling from his breath in searing rain. Ages thick with ghosts are wailing, pour your fire through us again. Jar of nights and jar of days, cracked in time from ends to ends, gather up these broken rays, yoke and seal them, heal and mend.
Thank you so much, Richard, for your reading and for sharing this poem with us. So, as our speaker today, we welcome Rabbi Neal Rose. Rabbi Rose taught at the University of Manitoba from 1967 to 2000. He was a member of the Department of Judaic Studies and Religion. He was also an instructor in family therapy at the University of Winnipeg's Department of Spiritual Care. He currently lives in St. Louis, where he serves as a rabbinic scholar in residence and community chaplain. Today, Rabbi Rose will talk to us about tales of love and narcissism in classical Jewish sources. Just before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone of a couple of guidelines for this call. Firstly, we ask you all to mute your microphones just to make sure there's no background noise. But at the same time, we do encourage you all to turn on your camera, as it creates a nice educational environment. Throughout the call and Q&A, we encourage you all to ask questions to Rabbi. You can use the raise your hand function, which can be found under reactions at the bottom of your screen, and I'll call out your name so you can ask your questions even during the presentation. Finally, this session is recorded for archival purposes and for you all. You should receive the recording link in a couple of days once it's ready. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Rabbi. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Listening to the poem kind of was synchronistic, because when I got finished hurriedly trying to put this presentation together, I realized that for some reason, when I finished, I began to think that I have a whole, here in America, there's a word or an acronym called STEM, which means it has to do with the sciences and the study of science and math. And I was never a STEM person. But at one point, our daughter, who's the youngest of our 5 kids, was struggling her way through physics. And I went to talk to the teacher, a high school teacher, and I said, it took me many years to appreciate what physics is all about. And that was one that has really given me a depth of understanding. And I'd like her to have that. Is there any way you can give that to her? Because we are not STEM people in our family, but we are poetic, right? And he said to me, I've been teaching this stuff for 25 years, and essentially, as they say here in America, he blew me off, and we got a tutor, and the tutor kind of got her through. She passed. And yet, so when I finished the presentation, was putting together, because Gary and I connected kind of too recently for me to do this in the kind of full way that I normally do things. I realized that the issue of the world of STEM, which is an amazing way to see the world, has 2 sides to it. It has all the equations and the algorithms, but it also has the poetic. And that's the way I think largely I understand religion, or what religion needs to become for us. It needs to become the poetic side of STEM, because that reaches into the spiritual dimension of self, And the poem, which was beautiful, you know, and I was watching the architecture. Then I noticed in the corner that it was a mandala, a Star of David mandala, and that brought it. So in the end, the conclusion I reached really came in the poem, right? For us to be able to live in the times that we live in and to use the tools that we use, we need to have both the algorithm side of STEM and the poetry of STEM. And I think religion / spirituality, right? Religion is or should be the poetry of the poetic side of STEM, because both of them ultimately have capacity to integrate us into the greater whole of things. So having said that, kind of told you what my conclusion is, let me walk you through my steps of how I prepared this. And I'm used to teaching and sharing ideas and encouraging people to ask me. I always say, let me get to the end of the sentence, and then feel free to make a comment, ask a question, agree, disagree. If I feel that the question is too far afield, I'll ask you to save it for the end, because I don't want to. I want to try to get, you know, most of what I've put together presented and leave reflection time at the end, should you want to reflect on what I'm talking about. So let me say a little bit about the methodology that I'm going to use. I'm going to look at several layers of Jewish literature. I'm going to look at biblical literature. And by what I mean by biblical, primarily is what Christians call the Old Testament. It's not a term that I, as a practicing Jew, like, because it suggests that we are stale. And that is not the way I experience Judaism. We are going to look at what's called intertestamental literature, which is Jewish literature between what many of you call the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then there's what we call rabbinic literature, which really includes books, some of you may have heard, called the Mishnah and the Talmud. These are, put it simply, these are collections of discussions by teachers of Judaism, someplace from the 2nd to the 5th century, trying to understand what it is that God wants of us in the world in which they live, and how to connect it to the wisdom of the past. Now, that may be too humanistic a definition for some people, but that's the way I'm gonna do this one. There are basically 2 Talmuds: the Talmud of the land of Israel, sometimes referred to without political overtones, the Palestinian Talmud, right? And because it represents the spirit, the teachings, or the dialogues between rabbis who lived in the land of Israel up until around the 2nd or 3rd century, whereupon the Romans really made it impossible for Jews to thrive in the land of Israel. And then what's called the Babylonian Talmud, the Jews who lived in what is today Syria, Iraq, Iran, that's called the Babylonian Talmud. The language of that Talmud is primarily one form or another of Aramaic, which is a cognate language to Hebrew. And a lot of it is, you'll often see, people will say the Talmud says. The Talmud is a book of discussions, right? And often debates. And seldom at the end of a debate do you find out who won, right? because this is really dialogues, right? And so a later tradition could pick out whose opinion on what subject they wanted to codify, to turn into law or into practice. So that's the literature that I'm dealing with. You'll hear in the things that I say echoes of people like Erich Fromm. You'll hear echoes of the German Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, Martin Buber. And as I get a little further on, you'll hear the names of the late Professor Michael Wishengrad and the very well-known Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel. So that's give you an idea where I'm coming from. What I'd like to do is to share various sources on the question of love. First of all, biblical literature. Biblical literature has various types of love. And it also you have the Song of Songs, on which the poem was built in a sense. You have love between individuals. You have love between man and woman. It's questionable whether we have in the Bible love between man and man or woman and woman, but that's a product of its time. So the Hebrew words, there are several Hebrew words for love. One of them is ahava. The other is rachamim. Rachamim. Rachamim, interestingly enough, comes from the Hebrew word rechem, the womb, right? And it bespeaks of a motherly love, I think in essence, right? But of love generally. The word chesed, I know, is a word Gary likes. We've talked about this. It also, in a sense, reflects our word love. So there's a whole vocabulary of love, and there's a whole series of different types of love. There are also in biblical and in the other literature stories of narcissism, right? To go back to Erich Fromm for a moment, Fromm distinguishes two kinds of narcissism, a kind of narcissism which one takes care of oneself, right? And then there's a narcissism which is fatal. It's fatal to the person who has it, and more often, more so, fatal to the person or persons to which that love is directed. I think of narcissism or love the way I think Fromm and Buber talk about it. Buber puts it, I think, very nicely. He says that in the I-thou relationship, right, in order for something to be that kind of love, there has to be a tzivishon, the thing in between. There is a way in which in love, myself and yourself are never engulfed. Somehow we join up, but we never engulf each other. I don't exactly remember the lines from Kyle Gibran, but in The Prophet, he talks about that kind of love. It's a relational love rather than an engulfing love. Oh, my wife has said 2 pillars that stand side by side. Actually, my wife is giving the presentation. 2 pillars that stand side by side that maintain the temple, right? But never touch, right? That's, but I think he and Buber are out after the same thing. So I will refer to that as relational, right, in nature. When the Bible talks about almost everything or anything, it talks in very concrete ways, right? It doesn't make a lot of generalizations. We're used to one of my great loves in life is philosophy, right? So I have what you might call the Greek and the Hebraic sense. The Hebraic is very, particularly in this case, the Bible and the rabbinic literature tend to be very, very concrete in the way it understands and directs the world. For example, there's a lot about love in the book of Proverbs, but those are really statements of how to behave. The book of Proverbs, and I want to put a picture in for a book, which if you're not familiar with it, with the book of Proverbs, this is a book by Rami Shapiro called Proverbs, and annotated and explained by Rabbi Rami Shapiro. It's part of what in Hebrew is called wisdom literature. In English, in Hebrew, we call it chokhmah. Now, first of all, the word, for those of you who have some Hebrew, the word for a wise man is chacham, or if you speak Yiddish, chacham, right? A wise woman is called chachma, right? But in biblical Hebrew, in the biblical world, wisdom is Lady Wisdom, and she is called chokhmah. And what chokhmah means is not the why of things, but the how of things. Okay, and so the book of Proverbs doesn't deal a lot with the why of things, the why of things, but the how of things, right? And that's what I partly meant, what I meant by the Bible being concrete. And wisdom, biblical wisdom literature tends to be that way, right? In that very concrete. So what do I come away with at this point? I come away with, again, to go back to Fromm, that in biblical literature, love is largely relational, and you might describe it as an art and a craft, right? It's a how, learning how, right? Is very, very important in biblical literature. Now, when I put the little notice together, I asked that if all possible, you have a Bible by your side. But we're going to I'm going to ask Gary, who's what I call my Zoom angel. I'm going to use something which you can find online called Bible Hub, right? I'm going to ask Gary to go to the book of Leviticus, all right, chapter 19. Good. All right. And we want the Niv, Gary, go off. All right, you can do it that way too. All right. No, all right. Gary. All right. Okay. Now it begins here, right? This is, yeah. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly, thank you, of Israel, and say to them, be holy because I, the Lord, am holy," right? "Each of you must respect your mother and father. You must observe the Sabbath. I am the Lord," right? Now, we'll leave out the Sabbath part for now, right? So notice how this starts. right? It starts with a relationship, right? Each of you must respect your mother and father. And notice, very atypical of our impression of the Bible, mother here comes before father. All right, now, let's go a little lower down. All right, and here's what you see. When you reap the harvest of the land, do not reap it to the very edges of your field, right? Or gather the gleanings of your harvest, right? Why? Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord, right? And then you have what sounds like the repetition of the 10 commandments. Do not steal, do not lie, right? And you have a whole panel of, and here I'm going to introduce a rabbinic notion. In rabbinic literature, when we talk about the realm of the interpersonal, we use the expression ben adam lechavero, B-E-N in Hebrew. The way I'm can mean two things. There are two different words actually. One means a son, right? And you know that from in Arabic, you have the name bin, right? Meaning somebody is the son of, right? You know, as in bin Laden, right? But the other Hebrew word is what Buber uses in German, der zwischen, the between, right? So if this is what we would call in rabbinic and rabbi speak, ben adam lechavero, right? And we keep going, right? Right? Do not defraud your neighbor. Keep going, right? Now, we want to get to the big one. Go to 19, right? All right. Wait. All right. Now, go back up. All right, to 18, right? This is kind of the end of this particular panel. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself, right? So what I want to say here, for our purposes, is that despite everything that I said before about the Bible not having a lot of generalizations, I think we can read love thy neighbor as thyself as illustrated by all the behavioral things that are listed above. Okay, so notice that what's involved here, right? It kind of summarizes all the things, the behavioral things, the behavioral norms that are listed above. So what is love? Love is relational. It is, in that sense, action, or in certain cases, non-action oriented, right? And it's very much between two people. Now, Gary, go down to, let me stop here for a minute. Anybody want to comment on love your neighbor as yourself, and who does it refer to? Who is the neighbor intended here? Anybody? Okay, all right. I'll answer my own question. I would like to say, being a 21st century person, I'd like to say that this refers to whoever is your neighbor, right? But it's not, right? It's be kind to your kinsmen, right? In other words, in biblical speak, other Israelites. Now, I won't go into the grammar here because that will probably put most of you to sleep. But you'll see why I'm saying that Go down, Gary, to verses 33 and 34. All right. Now, when a foreigner resides among you in the land, do not mistreat them, right? The foreigner residing among you must be treated as a native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land, right? So, yeah, two things strike me here. A, whoever wrote this, and I'll leave the question apart who the author is here, whoever the author is realizes that in the first statement above, what we have come to call the golden rule, this was quite particularistic in comparison to the golden rule. So they later on, when as they move through this whole issue, they realize that there are foreigners, or called in Hebrew gerim here, which in modern Hebrew means somebody who chooses to become Jewish, but in Bible talk, it means an alien, meaning somebody who's not of your immediate family or your immediate family tree or your ethnic group. So it has to go out of its way to say that, right? That's number one. Number two, it references your notion of, it appeals to your experience, right? Which I think, again, is another clue here about love thy neighbor as yourself. Or love the foreigner because you were foreigners, right? And then notice how the chapter goes on, right? Do not use dishonored standards. We still have all these behavioral norms, right? But they follow this moment where it says, wait a minute, all this refers to whoever lives among you. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, when Jesus talks about the two great commandments, right, which are love your neighbor as yourself, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God, that Jesus has already achieved the golden rule, right? But if you read it carefully, Jesus is not saying, does not have the golden rule. He has not universalized it. And he still very much is thinking in terms of the immediacy of people around him. In other words, the people of Israel. This whole the universalization of this comes at a later point in our evolution as people. So maybe we want to say is that maybe the story of the people of Israel needs to be seen as a kind of laboratory situation for trying to figure out how we are going to learn to become connected, to realize the interconnectivity of all existence, and in experiencing that, learn the ways to love one another, which of course is the goal of this. I think this entire series, but we're not there yet. That's the point I want to make here, and we have not at this point in the Bible is a way I'm looking at it is a laboratory experimenting with a particular group of people, preparing for a kind of more what I think is where we're moving in a more universalistic perspective. So let me stop here and ask if anybody, Gary, you want to go off the screen for a minute? All right. Anybody want to kick in here or comment or anybody? Okay, shall I go on? All right. Now, the second biblical piece I want to go to is was really suggested to me by Gary, and that is the opening chapter of the book of Genesis. And that's Genesis chapter 1. Now, let me make a couple of comments here. I think that when I think of how to read the Hebrew Bible, which we sometimes call the Torah, which means teaching. It doesn't mean law, L-A-W, right? That the opening chapter or chapters are really the mission statement of the entire Hebrew Bible. If we want to really understand what's happening, right, what the book is all about, or better to call the Bible not a book, but by our terms, an anthology, rather than a book, then it has a mission statement, right? And these are some of the points that I think come out of the mission statement, right? So you have in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now the earth was formless and void. The Hebrew tohu vavohu means absolute confusion. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So what do we have here? I'm going to go for what in my tradition is considered to be often a heretical reading, and is to say that there is a God who is the creative power facing chaos. And therefore, what happens here is that creation turns out to be a struggle between the forces of creativity against the force of chaos, right? Things are created, they fall apart, they are recreated, right? Now, when I use that idea of recreating, I'm going now not to a biblical notion, but to a notion in the rabbinic literature, which says two things here that I think are appropriate. One, it says that God is mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'asev reshit. The rabbis say that God daily recreates ma'asev reshit, the work or the workings of creation, right? Not the work of creation, but the workings, has a much more dynamic quality to it, right? It really speaks of creation not as a static entity, but more like a process that has to be. So what we're looking at here, from my reading, through the eyes of the rabbis, is that creation is an ongoing struggle between chaos and creativity, right? Now, as we move along, right, they use, this is a very arithmetic way of thinking about order, right? It uses ordinal numbers, first, second, third, right? There's something very arithmetic about this story. And you watch, and of course, I must say here that it's not that God quite rolls up his sleeves or her sleeves, which I'm using my speak, not Bible speak, but rather it's the image of the potentate, right? It's like one of my friends used to say of her father, and the question with my father never was, should I jump? The question was, how high, right? So, but now watch this one, and this is where I want to go. Now, this is always the question: why is it? Gary, can you go back a tad? We're missing. There we go. God said, no, oh yeah, 25. Okay, yeah, great. Go a little higher. Gary, thanks for putting up with me. All right. Then God said, let us make mankind, humankind, right? The word in Hebrew is Adam, which means humankind, in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea, etc., right? So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female created he them. All right, now, the point I want to make here is that when Neal Rose reads and teaches, my rule here is to come back to the question that if this is the goal of biblical literature, right, to see to it that we are living in the image of the divine. And in order for that to happen, then we must each see each other in that way, right? So we all embody the image of the divine. And so when we read whatever it is in the Bible, right, we come, and I do this often, we'll say, okay, how does this take us back? Let's go back. If this is the mission statement, how does this or does it not, right? Now, to go a little further in Jewish history, the 16th century Jewish mystic Isaac Luria, who lived in the Israeli city of Tzfat in the Galilee, said that in order for before a person begins to pray, one has to say, love thy neighbor as thyself. And Luria explains, the Hebrew reads, V'ahavta re'echacha kamocha. You should love God as you love yourself. And Luria says, what is it that I share with everybody else? The divine that lives in each of us. So Luria says, and this is where I'm kind of going, right? That all of the Bible should be measured against, am I acknowledging the divinity in self? Am I acknowledging the divinity in the other? And am I behaving that way? This is not an abstraction, right? But rather has to be measured both in terms of practice and the whole thing of, as it said, of the foreigner, right? Remember, what the negative side of this would be, right? So the memory of Egypt becomes the antithesis of the image of God. And I got to make sure that I am not enslaving or demeaning the other. I'm not creating. Now, to go a little further into biblical, to rabbinic talk, the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. It's probably a Hebraized, if you look it up in a dictionary, it's probably a Hebraized way of some Egyptian word, right? But the Talmudic rabbis didn't look at it that way. Everything had to be from Hebrew. And they said in the word Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word tsar, which in Hebrew can mean narrowness or pain. right? So looking at it that way, I have to be checking and seeing that in order to treat somebody as in the image, I got to make sure I got to check the negative side too. And am I in any way narrowing their humanity? Am I in any way, in my quote unquote goodness, am I imprisoning them or causing them pain? Right? So I know this sounds like a tall order, but we are talking, we are gathered together to talk about the crisis that we are in and where and in what ways I, as a practicing Jew and a teacher of Judaism, feel that our wisdom has a contribution to make. Now, if you could, wait, I'm checking with my coach here. Yes, Carol, what did you say? Oh, Carol said, yes, it's like in Hinduism, namaste, right? I acknowledge the God within you, if I get this one right, right? This is what Carol and I learned many years ago, hanging around with the Hare Krishna people. And then we went on to do some study in Hinduism on a different level. But oh, I like that. The light within me honors the light within you. Thank you. Right? Okay. The Hebrew is Ba'orcha nireh or. In your light, I see light. Right? Now, then we have God bless them, right? And this is often understood as God making a covenant. Covenant in Hebrew, brit, meaning a contract, right? Between God's self and the rest of the world generally, and humans in particular, right? But one last thing that I want to grab out of here, right? It said, God blessed them. He said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth. Now, we don't like the word subdue. I'm not sure it's the best translation, but for the moment, I'm going to leave that over, But these are all words that you would, as I said before, the God who is depicted here is a God who is a potentate, right? And it's not the image of God that obviously I am projecting here, right? But it's there, and we have to acknowledge it and then do whatever is necessary to bring our best understanding to the relationship between us and the great web of creation. Now, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree. And here we, of course, see that the human diet, as it's envisioned in here, is not animal-based, but plant-based. I'm not making a pitch for vegetarianism, right? And as some of you know, later on in the second creation story, which is the flood story, human beings we have that story of how human beings came to be permitted to eat animals. And there we have, and I'm not going to take you to the text now, but in that text, what you see is God says to Noah, henceforth you may use as food the animals, right? But not the blood therein, because the blood is in life, right? And that for me is the beginning and the motivation for the need for some sort of dietary spirituality. We use the word in Hebrew kashrut, right? But without going into all the details of what that means and has come to mean in Jewish tradition, I want to suggest here that that story talks about the need to develop a spiritual sense of spiritual intimacy, seeing the life within that which gives us life, right? And Judaism, as it developed specific rules and ways of talking about that. More recently, the late Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi introduced an interesting concept called eco-kashrut, right? By which he meant to create a modern day a sense of spirituality of the process of creating and consuming food, right? Which paid attention to ecological stresses and strains and realities, right? So I think what Schachter was trying to say was that since we live in this great web of interconnectivity, the most intimate of ourselves, which is, according to many, orality, there has to be a kind of, if I can use it, a spirituality or spiritualization of orality, right? And in Judaism, that has to do with two major things. One is the how we gather our food, how we consume it, how we share it, and the other thing that is important in all of this is the fact that we have to pay attention to what we eat, how it influences the world around us. So we're talking here, if I can abstract from Judaism, from our way of doing things, is that this spirituality is the spirituality of consumption of food, particularly, needs to be spiritualized. Now, the other thing that has to do with orality in Judaism is speech, right? In English, at least the English that I learned in Brooklyn, we used to say that somebody was bad-mouthing somebody, right? When they spoke ill of people. That is called in Hebrew, lashon hara, the evil tongue, right? From the biblical period up to the 21st century, Jewish wisdom literature, sometimes referred to in these days as Musar literature, tries to attune us to both the spirituality of both levels of the spirituality, what I'm calling the spirituality of orality. Okay, somebody put something on the screen and I missed it in the chat box. I don't know if I could get, let me go back. Gary, can you get me into the chat box?
I can read it out for you if you like.
Yeah, please.
So it reads, I find it enlightening the idea of relational love versus engulfing love. Likewise, the Jewish people as a laboratory to learn to love each other, to love each. Really beautiful how you show how to scale that to the whole planet as just one country. Curiously, the diaspora just did that. Jewish people are everywhere. Are they in the Arctic too? I am curious.
I know there's a mosque in the Arctic, because I know it was built in Canada and went all the way through Canada. We have friends of ours who are Jewish or in the Arctic, yeah. I've never been that far personally, but I think there are, right? But I will tell you, although since you raised that story, and this is not in my notes, but I'm going to go off script. About 15 years ago, the rabbi of our congregation was out of town, and when our rabbi would go out of town, I always told him, "Go, I'll pick up for you." So I got a call from a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist in Winnipeg, who once a month went up into the far north to Nineveh to provide psychiatric care to the folks that lived there. Anyway, and getting to know these people, they realized that the psychiatrist was Jewish. So there was a whole group of them that were Catholics in various parts of the north. They had an interesting combination of Aboriginal and Catholic spirituality. But these groups were due to come to Winnipeg for some sort of a retreat at a Catholic retreat center. And they asked our friend if would it be possible for them to visit the synagogue. So that my psychiatrist friend called me. I said, absolutely, right? Tell them to come Saturday morning, right? And I'll meet them at the door. So I meet them at the door Saturday morning, the 2 busloads of people. Some of them are dressed in their native attire. Others are dressed, they're like city, like most of us walk around. We go downstairs, and I'm told that I have 2 translators, right? Because there were 2 different Aboriginal languages in the room. So I start to talk about Judaism and the spiritual and the earthiness of Jewish spirituality. Things are bumping along. We get all finished, and I said, before we go upstairs for the service, anybody any questions? And the gentleman raises his hand and asks me in his Aboriginal language. The question is translated: how many caribou does it take to be able to make a copy of the 5 books of Moses? You see, in the synagogue, we read from a scroll, and that scroll is written on parchment made of animal skin, and the ink is made from earth and from plants, right? So I hear the question, and I'm about to give some sort of offhanded answer, and all of a sudden, a little thing goes off in my head that says to me, "Don't be stupid. Ask him." So I said, I don't know. I'm not a hunter, right? And he kind of looks around a little bit, he eyes it up and down, and he says to me, 50 caribou. And all of a sudden, this amazing light went on for me, right? That I always realized that there was life in the scroll, both in its sentiment and in its body. But that idea, every time now that I have contact with the scroll, right, that was an amazing moment for me, right? And later, they came up for the service. And toward the end of the service, the leader of the group was a bishop whose first language was French. So I asked him to speak, and he spoke in English. And then he said to me, "Rabbi, is it possible for our people to bless you?" So I said, "You know what? Let's turn it into a dialogue," right? Dialogue is they blessed us in their language, and we blessed them in Hebrew, right? I tell you the story because it fits so very well you talk about the North, right? And for me, the story just is this lesson of expansion, right? Of connecting to the great, in very concrete ways, right? So if you ask me, what was that moment? That was a moment of intercultural spirituality. All right.
Some might even call it love.
Yes.
In the exchange of the blessings, I would have called that love.
Right. Gary, is that what you mean by evolutionary love?
Yes.
I'm asking Gary that.
Yes. Well, evolutionary love is the love that is dynamically activating everything.
Right. So I think at that moment we plugged into that, right? At least certainly for me, that was the case. Okay, let me just check the time here. All right. What are some biblical biblical tales of love? I'm going to go a little faster, okay? I want to give you, of course, the biblical book of Ruth, right? And if you don't know the book biblical, let's go to the book of Ruth. Gary, they have the Christian Bible has a different order of books. You have to go up. It's in the historical books. Let's see, Kings. There we go. All right. Okay. You want to give us chapter 1? All right. So the backstory is that this was said to be in the time of the judges. That's why in the Christian Bible, it's among the historic books. This means that it took place, if it's an actual historical event, and for our purposes, we don't need to believe that. It can be a teaching story, right? It tells the story of a family, an Israelite family who lives in the city of Bethlehem, which in Hebrew is Bet Lechem, meaning the place or the location of food, or a place of fertility that produces wheat and barley. But there's a famine in Israel, and like in the Joseph story, they go to Moab, where there is food. They kind of integrate, and all is bumping along well. They have this Jewish family or Israelite family has 2 sons who marry 2 Moabite women, and then, as life would have it, the father and mother, the mother's name being Naomi, the husband dies, the 2 sons die, and then you have the famous scene, right, where Naomi says to the daughter-in-laws, "I'm going to go back to where I came from. You are 2 women, young women. Even if I could have a child, I could not produce a child, a male child, even if I could, who would eventually become your husband." So this is a non-ownership type love that she has for these 2 people, right? She says, "Go back, each one of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, chesed, as you have shown chesed, kindness to me and to your dead husbands. May the Lord grant each of you. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home with another husband." Right? Then she kissed them goodbye and wept and said, "We will go back with you to your people." And then you have the scene. Naomi turns around and says, "Return home, my daughters." Right? So she's saying to them, this is not good for you, right? It might be good for me, but it's not good for you, right? Right? And one of the daughter-in-laws does, in fact, Orpah does go back, right? And notice, for our purposes, she's just not saying this, she kisses her, right? They kiss each other, right? Right. Which means in Bible world, first of all, in the world the Bible comes, in the Bible world, men and women would kiss each other. Men kissed men and women kissed women. You still see this in Arabic culture, right? I have a friend of mine who's an Italian priest, and we have this kind of a 3-layer kiss that we always give each other. It's not in the West, in a more westernized society, it's still, people say, oh yeah, but a kiss is an expression of deep affection, and again, a connection through orality, right, without necessarily being sexual or erotic. But the second daughter, whose name is Ruth here, right, that's the famous statement, right? Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back. Where will you go? I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And where you were buried, I will be buried. And then may the Lord deal with me and be ever so on and on like that. You get, I think you get the point, right? Now, the story unfolds, right? But I want to go to the end of the story, right? Go to chapter 4. You probably have to go back up to the top. All right. Now, as the story goes on, Ruth marries a man called Boaz, who's a maker and a shaker in that society. He's very important. He's wealthy and a man of importance. And go a little further, they have children, right? Keep going, right? So, no, wait, okay. Notice the heading, right? Naomi gains a son, right? So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, praise be the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. I don't want to go into the sociology of all this at the moment. What I do want to say is the caption to me says first of all, something very important. And that is the fact that the child is not just the child of Ruth and Boaz. It is the child of the entire of Naomi as well, right? And this opens up the whole notion in the Hebrew Bible of what do we mean by when we say somebody is a father, a mother, or somebody is a child of somebody. In the Bible, being a child of somebody does not necessarily mean that you are the father or the mother. You could be the grandmother. You could be an uncle, right? In other words, the notion of our notion of nuclear family is really alien from the Bible, right? The Bible has a much larger sense of family. It seems to me that again, later on in the rabbinic period, the rabbis say that if you are somebody's teacher, then that person is your child, right? That opens up a very important question about the world that we live in, about whose children are the children of the world, right? That's the question that comes to me here, right? And this, again, this notion of love, right? The love, the kind of relational, caring love that needs to be created and emulated and cultivated for children, all people's children, right? Now, I am now talking in Jewish terms. I'm talking in the times of what we call the Messiah. Because in Jewish tradition, when you talk about the world the way you want it, right, then it's in the poetry, in that what I call messianic poetry. Now, what leads me to say this at this point? Look at the genealogy here that comes at the end of the book of Ruth, okay? So you see that as you go through this, some of you will recognize this genealogy from the opening genealogy in the book of Matthew, in the Christian scriptures, in the New Testament, right? But you'll notice if you go through this, right, that there are names here that the women in this were listed in the genealogy, both here and in Matthew. There are a number of women who are not born as Jews, right? So King David is considered in Jewish mythology to be the kind of source from which the Messiah will descend. So both here and in the New Testament, right? That's why it's so important that the book of Matthew, which is a gospel written specifically for a Jewish audience, right? That it give a genealogy to show that Jesus is descended from the house of David. But if you look at that genealogy and this genealogy, and the way the rabbis understand the origins, the biological origins of the Messiah has the body cells, the DNA of both Jew and Gentile, right? And therefore, the reason that's why I connected this vision of how to relate to children, right? Because the book of Ruth, whoever put the genealogy here, wanted to frame Ruth as part of the messianic, the poetry, what I call the poetry of the messianic era, right? In other words, when we think messianic, right, we think of it as the world as it should be. That's in part what I meant by STEM needing poetry. Mythology is a form of poetry, right? Narrative speaks to us. Poetry, rhyme, and rhythm enters into our souls in a different way than, at least for me, than algorithms and things mathematical. Now, for some of you, that may be very different, right? So the other very important issue here is the messianic element here. Okay, Gary, you want to bring the screen down for a moment?
We called this love and narcissism. So I actually wanted to spend more time on love than I want on narcissism. But let me direct you to some biblical stories of narcissism, right? One of them is, of course, the famous story of King David, and the way David falls for a woman called Bathsheba, or Bathsheba in English, right? And so if you look at the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 12, right? the background to that chapter, 2 Samuel 12. Gary, can you put that up? No, I'll try to keep my paws off it. David is on in Israel today, and this is true throughout a large part of the Middle East, but certainly in what today is called Israel and Palestine. Homes are usually built with flat top roofs, right? That's why in the book of Deuteronomy, one of the rules is that you should build a fence on your roof, right? Now, if you have a slanted roof, that's not an issue. If you have, as they do in Israel, flat top roofs, right, which is most common, then people do spend time. The roof is a place where many people live, particularly when before the high-rise building came into existence. So this was true in biblical times. David was on his roof. He spots a woman being bathed or bathing, and she's bathing, as one normally bathes, and he's just taken by her.
Rabbi Rose, can you just let me know what the reference is that you want me to go to?
Yes, the second book of Samuel, chapter 12.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. David is the king, right? And he finds out that this woman that he's so taken by, that she is the wife of a prominent member of his army. And to make a somewhat longer story short, he and this woman have a romantic relationship. And what does he do with the husband? He orders him to go into the heat of battle, where the husband is, of course, killed. And that, David believes, that legitimizes his relationship with this woman, Bathsheba, right?
Interrupt. I just wanted to say that we can't see your screen share, Gary.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Let me. Okay, hold on. Stop share. Hold on.
Thank you for that.
Let's go.
Okay. Let's see. Is that it?
That's better.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Now this is chapter 12, which.
Yes, that 2 Samuel 12.
Yeah. Okay.
So David's behavior is clearly an example of fatal narcissism, right? Now, just as a side note, one of the neat things about Bible stories is that, or the Bible generally, is that many of its characters, we get to see them in their totality of their being, right? There's a lot of gray area. They're not depicted in halos, so to speak. Now, what happens to David and his lady friend or wife, whatever you want to call her? They're moving through life. They beat the system, but conscience, right? The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were two men in a town. What we're going to hear now is a parable, right? Called in Hebrew, mashal. Mashal. All right? And as you know, one of the great parabolists of Western literature is Jesus, right? But Jesus was in this Hebraic tradition of tellers of parables, or parabolist, if you want to use the phrase. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb that he bought. He raised it, it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, even slept in his arms. It was a daughter to him, right? Now, what happens, right? A traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Now, when Nathan comes to David, he comes to David supposedly in David's role as king and judge. When the Hebrew word melech, which is king, we think of the great, Arthur and, the King of England and whatever it is. But I always like to think of biblical kings more like warlords because they ruled over small territory and usually relatively small sizes of groups, right? Kings that were not the king, they were not what we would later call emperors, right? So one of the jobs of the king in those days was that you brought your legal issues to the king. So Nathan comes, and David thinks that Nathan is bringing to him a legal case, wanting David to intervene in what is clearly an egregious crime. But Nathan is not doing that. Nathan is telling him a parable, right? So, but David, in his narcissism, doesn't hear it. He thinks that Nathan is addressing him as the almighty judge of men and women who have the privilege of living in his kingdom. David burned with anger against the man. And of course, Nathan said to him, verse 7, "You are the man," right? So it's a very clever chapter, right? And it says a great deal to me about the nature of narcissism, right? Now, that's number one. Number two, what we have here in our colloquial English is speaking truth to power, right? And I think that becomes, again, in our quest for the kind of love that we want to see, right? It becomes part of the toolbox for reaching that kind of love. The preparedness to speak truth to power. Now, the second story of love, Gary, the book of Jonah. Good. Now, we want to go to Jonah chapter 4. Now, the backstory. In chapter 1, Jonah gets a call from God to go to the Assyrian city of Nineveh to tell the people that they have sinned and they have to repent. When the story opens, Jonah is getting on a boat going in the opposite direction to a place called Tarshish, right? Let me get myself organized here. Yeah. So why does Jonah go in the opposite direction? Why does he not listen? Because the people of Assyria had greatly oppressed the people of Israel. And Jonah knows that God is the God of forgiveness, and that the God that Jonah knows will listen. If these people really repent, God will forgive them and not destroy them, because Jonah is coming like it is supposed to go, like what we in America call a hell and brimstone preacher, telling them either repent or God will destroy you. And Jonah says, there's a good chance they'll repent. And I don't want my enemies to be alive, right? They've done terrible things. So Jonah, in his own way, is clearly disobeying the call of God, because he knows the loving nature of God. But through a series of what happens, of course, is that Jonah gets, God creates the great storm. They throw Jonah overboard. Jonah's swallowed by the fish. That's chapter 2. Chapter 3, he goes to Tarshish. And what happens in Tarshish? He goes and he brings the message.
You mean Nineveh? Nineveh, right?
Nineveh, thank you. He brings to Nineveh, right? And he says, God will, and what happens? Everybody according to the story, everybody repents, even down, the writer says, to the animals, right? Which is a kind of biblical form of biblical exaggeration to say that the repentance was complete. Now, the irony of ironies is that Jonah is the only prophet in the entire Hebrew Bible who succeeded in what the mission God gave him, right? But what happened to poor Jonah, right? Let's go to verse 5, right? Jonah, it says earlier that, go back, Gary, go back to the top, okay? But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong. And he became angry, right? And he prayed to God, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. Now, it seems to me that this is as good an example of narcissism as you get, right? And of course, if God is the hero of the Bible, or the main character of the Bible, then what we have here, right, is the story indicates that the notion of God's love transcends ethnic realities, right? Despite what has happened before in history, right? So this narcissism is a narcissism of, I guess, a certain kind of nationalism, where, but it's set in opposition to God and to godliness, right? So if we want to talk about God and love here, we see that the love of God transcends national boundaries, right? And looks at things in a much more holistic and compassionate way. Now, I'm running out of time because I wanted to leave time for questions. So I'm going to move from here to the work of the late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel on the nature of prophets in biblical prophecy. All right, Gary, you can take it off the screen. Heschel introduces the idea when in his book called The Prophets, right? This notion that first of all, that the stories of the Bible is the stories of the relationship between the prophets and God in the Bible, that the relationship between God and people, that the Bible is only one chapter in the ongoing relationship of God and the world, right? Now Heschel didn't quite put it that way, but I'm taking off on Heschel's statement that God has an ongoing relationship with the world. And what Heschel goes on to develop this notion of when he talks about pathos, he speaks of a God who is often, we often say, well, we don't want a God who is anthropomorphic, right? It's one of the criticisms you often hear. But the God who Heschel describes as, and tries to document in this, I'll show you the book, right? It's a substantial book. He tries to make this case, and in many ways makes it quite convincingly, I think, that at least the God who's described in the Bible is a God who had what we would call a deep emotional relationship and connectivity with, in this case, the people of Israel and the world in general, right? And therefore, when he talks about God as a character, right, he talks about a God who is relational, a God for whom every human being is not an object, but a subject. And God, therefore, becomes a model for our purposes of what love is. Love is relational. It sees other human beings as not as objects, but as other subjects. And here, of course, we're talking the language of Martin Buber, of I and thou. But Heschel creates this whole study of the prophets. And the prophet maybe who best exemplifies Heschel's notion of the God who has this relationship, which he calls the relationship of pathos, is the prophet Hosea. And Gary, could you put the book of Hosea on the screen? All right. You went too far, I think. Yeah, go up a little. No, down, 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 down. There you go. Okay. Now, usually prophets, right, in the books of the Bible get a call from God, right? And they respond or they say yes or no. But most prophet the books begin that way, the call from God. But to make this one simple, right? When Hosea is called to prophecy, right? It begins this way. When the Lord began to speak to Hosea, the call came, go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, right? And so that's what happens. And what happens in the book, to make it a little shorter, because I want to leave time for discussion, is that he does marry this woman, and God uses the pain and anguish of marital infidelity, right, to have Hosea appreciate what God experiences when the people of Israel and the people of the world live not in accordance to what I used earlier, the notion of living in the image of God, right? Now, if you go to chapter 2, right, and keep going down very slowly. What happens here is in chapter 2 is that in this chapter, God talks about making has Hosea go back and remarry this woman. But this is a marriage, go ahead, keep going, that is built on love, that is one of trust, of fidelity, of kindness, and concern. Look at verse 19, right? I will, and this is the second marriage. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. The Hebrew says that you will have dat Elohim, that you will have knowledge of God, meaning that you will sense the reality of the anguish that God feels when people do not live in what I've called earlier the image of God. I'm going to stop here. I'm over time, and you'll just notice early in this chapter there is also at the same time a covenant that God makes with the natural, what we sometimes call the natural world. So I want to finish by saying that maybe what I wanted to, it all comes down to talking about the need to have covenantal love, and the ways and means to do that are really what we're out after. I'm going to stop here. All right, Gary, you want to bring up the screen?
Well,
Anyway, I hope that was give you some idea of way this particular teacher of Judaism understands love in the biblical and to some degree later Jewish literature, and that it will be in some way helpful to your project and to our project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Rose, for your wonderful presentation and your analysis of the Bible. So we can open up the discussion now. If you do have a question, you can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, found under reactions. Otherwise, if you're more comfortable, you can always type your question in the chat and I can read it out for you. Valjean. Oh, you're muted, Valjean.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this was really great. And I just had a question about the last word when you said acknowledge the Lord. I once studied Hebrew, but I've forgotten it. But I do know that the vowels were not there. And sometimes a word could have another meaning. Was it knowledge there or meaning that I would obey? Because
no, it's a good question. No, the word dot,
yeah,
from the Hebrew word yodea, to know.
Yeah.
Remember when we were kids and when we wanted to talk about sexual intercourse, we would say, I mean that in the biblical sense, right? Adam knew Eve. So there it is intimate when it says knowledge of God, it means vibrating on picking up God's vibrations, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean obeying, right? In this case, it means vibrating on the same channel.
But in all these books, there was a lot of judgment of God. A lot of people were destroyed because they did not obey.
Yes, yes. And what's the question? You obviously have a question there.
No, I'm not sure I do have a question there. It's more a comment in terms of the relationship. There was always a condition.
Yes, but I think there has to be a condition, doesn't there? People have to. We need to have mutuality. I don't know if that's what that's my sense of things, that we both have to be committed, right? That's why I think covenant is an interesting idea. It suggests mutuality and relationship, right? And what happens when you don't?
Which is what we have today.
Yes, right. So I know people are very often very critical of biblical literature because there's a lot of bloodshed, right? But what I take away from this is that there are consequences that when we don't live by the contract, right? And so it seemed to me here that's why I talked about the notion of maybe what we need to talk about here is a covenantal relationship, just as in Jonah, just as in Hosea before, it says God says, "I will make a covenant with essentially the birds, the bees, the land, everything," right, including us. But if there's a covenant, then there's responsibility. And if we don't meet our responsibility, right, then there's going to be, how would we say this? Bad karma, right? Which may be where we're at these days. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Valjean, for coming in. Anyone else have a question? I can see there's a comment, which in the chat, which reads, "What happens in the microcosm is mirrored into the macrocosm. This is cosmic law, so beautifully illustrated by Hoseas."
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you.
I'll read it again. It's what happens in the microcosm is mirrored in the macrocosm. This is cosmic law, so beautifully illustrated by Hoseas.
Yes, I think that's a very important insight, right? To think of it in all too simplistic ways, think of it as a series of concentric circles, right, that move out, right? The macro and the micro are intimately related. Gary, I see you're shaking your head.
No, I was just thinking about the idea of the individual's responsibility versus the responsibility of groups, right, to each other. But it has to begin with the individual, I would assume, right? To begin, because the only person we can control, the only actions we can control are our own individual actions.
But then the question becomes, how do we learn to sensitize ourselves, right? It's a kind of I think it's the proverbial chicken and egg question, right? One of the things about certainly rabbinic literature is that it has tolerance for the paradox, right? which is to say there is a paradoxical relationship between the individual and the whole, right? The individual cannot be there without the whole, and the other hand, the whole is made up of the individual, right? So there's a paradoxical kind of interconnectivity here that is so very, very important. I know, you know, in therapy, the usual thing is, well, you can't control anybody but yourself, right? And that's true, right? But then along came family therapy and said, well, you know, we did a lot of this therapy on individuals. What about the environment, right? And then at a certain point, you begin to realize that there are all kind of family issues, right? Because there are certain societal issues, right, that are greater than the family, right? So, you know, to me, it seems that we what's missing often in linear thinking is this more what I would call paradoxical thinking, right? Two things can be true at the same time, or you can say we have to juggle a lot of balls at the same time, and I think that's what makes all this so very difficult, right? That's why I like the notion of relational, right, as opposed to, you know, individual.
Which is bilateral. Right?
Bilateral, yes.
Thank you. We have a question from yesterday's speaker, Vincent.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can,
Hi.
yeah.
Hi, I am sorry, my video is not working. I apologize. First off,
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. First off, thank you very much. I just want to make, I would like to offer a recollection and then ask a question very quickly. The recollection is that when Martin Luther King gave the talk at Riverside Cathedral, it's entitled Beyond Vietnam, or alternatively, Breaking Silence, when he was challenged by the youth that he's always chastising them for engaging in violence or willing to engage in violence, but he's never once called his country to account. And he responded by speaking out against his country. And when he spoke on that occasion, Rabbi Heschel, of course, was on the stage with him.
Yes.
And had been encouraging him for quite a while to speak out against Vietnam.
Yes.
So that's a very interesting connection.
Yes.
The title of another one of Rabbi Heschel's books is Man in Search of God.
Right.
I'm sorry. I reversed that. God in Search of Man.
Yes.
And so my question really is, when Adam, or when the story of brother murdering brother happens very early in the Bible, and the question is, am I my brother's keeper? That's a question posed by a murderer to, in some sense, get out from under accountability. And so the question really is, it seems to me that the Bible is, as much as anything, a story about the alienation resulting from betrayal. And then the possibility of reconciliation when it seems to be utterly impossible. Now that is my crude, unlearned response. I was wondering if that has any merit or has any weight in terms of your more learned reading.
First of all, thank you for that. And secondly, you're being modest. I think that is another way to talk about what I was talking about. Okay. But my preference, as I say, is to put the emphasis on the positive side of the biblical story, right? The emphasis on we are created in the image of God, and that becomes the test for all things, right? So my way of talking about it is the alienation, being in the zone and being out of the zone. Another way of talking about it, and it equally fine and probably equally helpful, is the way you're doing it, right? But I wanted to avoid that approach because of I wanted a more positive spin on things. But what you're saying could very well apply and might be as helpful, if not more helpful, than the way I'm talking about it.
Just might I follow up, please?
Please.
So I agree with the importance of emphasizing the positive, but in a culture such as ours, in which self-love can so easily degenerate into narcissistic self-love, and we do not think of ourselves. We're much like David. We don't recognize ourselves when our portrait is given to us. So might it be important at this time in certain cultures to confront us human beings with our own darkness? And so yes, but we've been giving ourselves too many compliments and too many affirmations. I don't know if we have felt with sufficient urgency the bracing challenges of the Hebrew or the Christian scripture.
Psychologically.
Again, I don't disagree with you, right? It's just that I'm not sure how we all have a shadow, to use, Jung really got that one right. Okay. And sometimes to use very concrete languages, we often smell our stinky selves, right? But I think that, again, in this presentation, I wanted to talk about the power of love, and therefore put the emphasis there. At some point, you're right. I think we all need to have the ego strength to encounter our shadow. But I think it takes a great deal of ego strength to be able to encounter, acknowledge, and deal with the dark side of yourself. And so again, my approach is the one that I took here, but maybe both are necessary at the same time, right? And I think that's why, to follow your logic, that's why the biblical tales are both of love and narcissism. So I guess if given your comments, if I were to redo this, maybe I should have put more balance between the two sets of stories, right? Rather than put the emphasis on love. But I chose to go in that direction. Given your comments, would be interesting. I'm not obliging anybody to come back to my rewrite, but I think there's a lot in what you're saying.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for coming in. I'd just like to take the final question from Alan, who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you. A very general question. I have one of my oldest and best friends. We seem to have very different political views. And I discovered a couple of weeks ago, there was something very fundamental in terms of I consider nations to be natural. I discovered about 2 weeks ago that he actually believes nations are merely artificial, prisoners of geography. And I can really say, and he actually says he doesn't believe, this was a text message, he doesn't believe in national constructs. Well, it strikes me that nations, well, I believe nations are real, although of course in today's world, there really are some quite artificial nations that were created 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And I was just wondering what, if you could help me, what does Judaism say in terms of what is a nation? Because in your talk, you mentioned, I think, the foreigner. And it strikes me a starting point is if we could have a really good understanding of what a nation is, then from that basis, there can then start being appreciation and love between nations.
Wow. Well, first of all, remember that our notion, our modern notion of the nation state didn't really exist in biblical times, right? It was an altogether. It's clear if you stay at the surface of, use just the word, the Hebrew word, there are two Hebrew words here for nation. One of them is am, right? And the other, a word you've all heard, is the word goy, right? Usually spelled in English G-O-Y. Now, in Yiddish lingo, goy is often used to refer to a Gentile, but biblically, the word goy means a nation. And the Bible certainly acknowledges the reality of nationhood, right? But sees it coming together as, again, that messianic basket, if you want to call it, right? In the messianic image or the messianic dream, which I think is so very important. We need a dream. We need the poetry that projects what that talks about what we can become, right? We often lose sight of that, right? I think the messianic impulse is so very important in creating this kind of world that we're interested in. In that image, the nations come together, right? And of course, in biblical terms, they all come to acknowledge the one God in Jerusalem, right? Which of course that statement has its political overtones, right? And it's very hard for us to hear anything but contemporary politics. So I would say, on a surface level, that the biblical sense of things is that people automatically fall into groups, whether they be nations, families, right? But there's a larger picture that we need, right? And that the world physically, emotionally has to be, again, it's one of those paradoxical things that we were talking about, right? You can't live only as an individual. You have to live as a group, right? And there are multiple groups. The biblical sense I get from the Bible that in the messianic image is that these groups will function in a way that will give strength and love and nurturance to everybody, right? But we all have individualism, right? It's built into our humanness, right? The best example I can think of is people try to create an international language, Esperanto, right? I don't know how many of you ever heard of Esperanto, let alone speak Esperanto, right? And I think language is a good example. We all speak different languages because they represent the interior and exteriority of us as individuals and as a group. It's when these become tools of aggression, right, rather than tools of what we're calling love and nurturance, that it becomes a problem, right? So I think it's silly myself to deny the existence of nations and families, et cetera, right? Or how they're formed. It's the question of how they're formed and how they relate to each other.
Thank you. It's a beautiful answer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. It's a great question.
Thank you, Alan, for your question. So we have run over, so I guess we should really start closing. Rabbi, do you have any final words for us?
Well, I want to thank you all. I hope that in my own way, I made a small contribution to your ongoing project. And I look forward to hearing, and participating in future lectures. So thank you very much. I wish that someday we could all meet, but it was wonderful meeting you all on Zoom. So God bless, and all of you take care.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for involving me, Gary. I really appreciate this, and I look forward to hearing what other people have to say.
Amazing. Well, you certainly have contributed to this, to our project. So thank you so much for doing that. I also wanted to thank Gary for supporting us during this session. And of course, thank you all for joining us through your contributions, questions, or even just being here and listening. Just before we all go, I'd just like to invite you all to our second weekend of this series, which on Saturday we will have John Briggs, who will talk to us about portrayals of love in literature and culture. And on Sunday we will have Satish Kumar, who will discuss the power of love. As always, if you have any questions or anything at all, you can contact us on our website or on email. If you can email us directly at eleanor@paracenter.com. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you again, Rabbi, and we'll see you again soon here at the Party Center. Bye-bye.